touch. It's crazy.
You know, I said, I think several times, I'm not a smartphone user or
Yeah.
enthusiast. And I actually have a lot of fun just watching people being such nerds. It's really has a weird effect on society.
Strange.
In not a healthy way. But, you know, that's why I do it. Okay, guys, so let me tell you what I've done, and let me tell you what I'd like to do, and then we'll do everything else you'd like to do when we're done, okay? Hello, world of the internet. I have taken all of your questions, and I've sort of organized them, putting similar questions together, so we can sort of deal with each topic one by one, and that way we get through everything. And I've made some notes, and I'll send this to you, but you'll probably want to make your own notes too, okay? And then anything else that comes up, we can talk about that. And I put them what I think is kind of a logical order, but I hope that works for you too. So anyway, there were a bunch of questions that were sort of about what's the exam going to be like. And so I thought we could just do those first as sort of a warm-up. So I hope you guys will recognize the questions you sent in. So questions about what kind of questions there'll be, the format. Is it going to feel like the lab or sort of a combination of lecture and lab? How important is vocabulary? All these sort of things, right? So let me just try to address them one by one. First of all, it's going to be a two-part test. Part one is going to be you sitting with a pencil and a piece of paper and answering questions. Very similar to the kinds of tests you've taken a million times, okay? You'll be sketching things, you'll be writing out short answers, you'll be answering questions, okay? Now, I think I've said very clearly that understanding and using the proper GIS terminology is expected. So certainly that's part of it, okay? And I also believe I told you guys could bring a page of notes, right? So just bring, like, you know, they call it a cheat sheet, right? You're not cheating, I hate that name. But you can bring one piece of paper with anything in the world you want written on it. Does that make sense? Or printed on it, or what have you. Can you review what you were looking for when we write descriptions of the maps we make? Okay, I'm going to be very specific when I ask you for something like that, and I'll underline words to be careful, okay? But if I say something like, in your description, refer to specific parts of the map, I would expect you to do that. Does that make sense? So I'll try to be very purposeful in the way I word questions like that. Is that fair? Okay. And now my favorite question, which is, what's a good strategy if you get stuck? And I think that it's sort of the time-honored strategies of, if you're stuck, you can ask for help, right? I'll be here. Or we talked about being able to tap out, didn't we? If there is a question, and there will be very few, if any, if there's a question where you have to answer this part before you go on to this part, and you can't get the first part answered, you can just come to me and say, you know what, I just can't do this step, and I'll give you what you need. Does that make sense? And that way you can do the whole thing and get partial credit, even though you couldn't do one of the steps. Fair? Okay. And finally, you guys just have to budget your own time, don't you? Right? Okay. Is that okay?
So asking for help, do we like lose points? If we
No, you don't ask. Oh my God, no. Ask for help. The only way that you would lose points would be if you said, you know what, question for A, B, and C. I just can't do 4A, but I need it for 4B. So could you give me the answer for 4A? Then I'd say, you know what, for 4A, you just don't get any credit.
Okay.
But for B, you're eligible for whatever. The only other way you'd lose credit is if you cheated, and that is a lot messier, and I know you're not going to do that.
What's the size of the cheat sheet? Is it like a paper like this, or is it like an index card?
8.5 by 11 piece of paper.
A sheet.
And I won't measure it, but I can trust you. Is that okay? Okay. Okay, in general, what are good steps for troubleshooting if something doesn't work? All I can say is call me as soon as possible, okay? You will not be penalized if you have a problem that you bear no fault for. Make sense? If you can't do something, that's your fault. But if it's not letting you do something that you are trying to do and you're using all the right approaches, then it's not your fault. Make sense? Okay, so now there were a set of questions which talking about wanting to demo on buffers and about summarizing data, and it was really all about sort of what we did in the last lab. Does that make sense? So I thought what I'd do is I'd very quickly sort of run through the last lab for you, because that's going to address a lot of the questions, the individual questions that people had, but then we will visit those. Does that seem okay? Okay. And if anybody's bored by this, you can go have a cigarette or something. But you know that you started out this lab with some shapefiles, and then you had an Excel layer, right? And that Excel file is here. And if you opened it up in Excel, you would notice a number of things, which was you had some illegal characters in the field names, right? And you can't bring an Excel file into ArcMap and have it work properly, right? If you have problems like that. So the first thing you need to do when you're working with Excel is just look at the file and make sure about two things. One is that the field names don't contain any characters that are improper. And in this case, you can't have these two characters there, and you certainly can't have any parentheses here, right? And in the second case, you should look at all of your numbers and say, is the formatting in Excel correct for the kinds of numbers I have? So everything in here is a number, but this column, this column, this column, and this column are all numbers that are used as labels, right? They're nominal numbers.
The
right?
first four?
The first four columns.
What
right?
isn't the...
This is a number that indicates which county. So instead of saying, you know, Los Angeles County, it says 037.
Isn't the fourth column D, isn't that justified to the right?
All of these are, okay, all of these are these three are justified to the left. And that is the key in Excel and also in ArcMap that tells you that that's text, okay? But you know that in Excel, you can justify things to the right or left or the center or whatever you want, right? It's called alignment, okay? So this column right here is simply these numbers that have been transposed into integers.
Okay.
Compare this one, this doesn't have the leading zero, right? Which an integer can't have. So this would be, you could call this the integer version of that, although they're not exactly the same.
Changes the justification. Excel changes the type of file format or whatever that it's once you open it in ArcMaps. Is that correct?
Does Excel change?
So if I change the justification in Excel in a column, and then I open that table in ArcMaps, does that just changing
ArcMap
it?
would take on the justification right or left that Excel gave.
Okay, so it does matter in
Yeah.
Excel. Okay.
It really doesn't matter in Excel that much. It matters a lot in ArcMap.
Yeah.
And that's one of the problems with going from.
I'm saying you can change it in Excel.
You can.
Okay.
You
That's
can.
good. And that-
You can also change it in ArcMap.
Okay.
But the important thing is to first look at the numbers you have and say, I know what kind of numbers these are. Does it make sense in terms of the right-left justification?
Yeah, just to elaborate on Mo's question, so if you change it to being like text, but it's to the left in Excel, will it, or vice, or if it's on the right in Excel, will it be then a number, or will it be text when it comes into ArcMap?
Okay, let's do an experiment, okay? I'm going to insert a column here,
Sure.
right? And I'll call it Arc Key Group 2, right? That's the same as this one, right? And I will actually paste that in there, and I'll call this Arc Key 2, and we're good, right? They're exactly the same. Then I'll take this one, and I will, I think it's in format cells, and I will say that this is actually text instead of a number. That make sense? And see how it's justified it the other way? So these are identical, and Excel really doesn't care, but ArcMap will see this as text and this as a number. And I've got to give them two different names, right? Okay, so I'm saving this in Excel, just saving it in Excel, right? And then I'm going to close it. You should close Excel before you open things in ArcMap, otherwise there'll be conflicts between the two. is one thing you might not realize is that when you open files in one application or another, there are other temporary files that are opened, right? And sometimes they want to use the same one, and that doesn't work. All right, so here we're back in ArcMap, and now we can open that Excel table, which is this one, right? And of course, it had 2 tabs. So ArcMap says, well, which of those 2 tabs do you want? And these tab names are always a little wonky, okay? They have characters that you wouldn't think belonged in an ArcMap file and that sort of thing. But we do know it was the first tab, right? And so that's the one we want, and we can add that one, and then we can open it, take a look at it, and everything should look fine. And if we drag this a little wider, you can see that this one is justified to the left, that one is justified to the right, but they're still the same, okay? And GOID 10 is also a text. Make sense? Okay. If you're bringing data in from Excel, I recommend that as soon as you get it in and you're happy with it, export it out as a DBase file. Don't work with it in Excel because you're going to have that potential for conflicts. All you're using Excel for is a convenient way to prepare some data and get it into ArcMap, and then let Excel go away. That makes sense? So Excel's already closed. Question?
So when you're exporting it as a DBase file, you're doing that in GIS, not
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
You're opening up that and then exporting onto that.
And that's the next thing I'm going to do, right? So here I can go. To export. And I'm going to make sure I know what it's called and where it is, right? And I'll just put it there, it's fine. And notice it's 23,000 records. These are block group demographics, and there's 23,000 plus in the state of California, okay? So now I've got my DBF file. I'm just gonna get rid of this because it's gonna do me no good and maybe do me evil. Yeah.
So when you remove something from your table of contents, you remove a layer, are you actually
You're
removing?
not deleting it.
Okay.
All you're doing is removing it from this project.
Okay, from the actual, okay, because I think I was having trouble last time in terms of trying to start over on a layer. I would remove it, but it technically wouldn't be taken away from the ArcMap file, so it would mess everything up.
Yeah, and you know what? Let me show you. This addresses a question
We'll get
somebody
there,
asked.
yeah.
No, well, it's a question we'll get later, but that's okay.
Okay.
One thing I often do, you don't have to do this, is I will open my table of content, my Art Catalog window and have it open because then I can actually delete things for good.
So everything in that catalog window is what's running in the file that you're using on the
The Art Catalog window is like Windows File Explorer, but it's ArcMap customized so that if you're looking for shape files, instead of those shape files appearing as a whole bunch of files with the same name and different extensions, they only exist as one. And you can do things in our catalog like preview data and rename files in a very convenient way. Is it perfect? No, but it's pretty convenient and I use it a lot. So I'm going to go to the place where I put this data right here. And here are all those things. And that's my export file, and this is the file that I edited, right? Or this one. So if I go like that and I delete this, I think it says, are you sure? And I see, yes, I'm sure. It's gone, okay? And by the way, that's not recoverable. You can't undo that. So sometimes when I'm generating a lot of shape files and I make a mistake, or I'm generating a whole bunch of them and I just want to get rid of them, I'll throw them away here. Because I'm kind of really a careful guy, even though I don't seem that way, what I'll typically do is I'll cut and paste them into another folder. Then when I'm all done, I'll just throw that folder away. That way I have the undo capability if I need it, all right? All right, so there's our catalog, but that's what it's useful for. And, you know, just to show you, this is the layer I have open here, right? If for some crazy reason I wanted to change its name, I could do that. And now it's called T10. Is it still there?
Yeah, it's the bottom.
Ah, yes, okay. And you can see that there's not perfect updating between Art Catalog and Art Map, which is kind of a annoying thing, but it is what it is, okay? And because of that, I'm gonna remove this, which doesn't actually remove it from the disk. Then I'll add it again. And by the way, you can just drag it in like that too. Okay? Somebody asked, is it better to use the Add Data button or Art Catalog? It's really your choice. Okay? I think our catalog is handy to have open. It's more convenient to do some things. All right? And now it's been renamed. So now I have my layer, my table here that I've imported. And this is census tracts only for Los Angeles County. This is demographic information for all of California. So it just makes it easier if I go ahead and I select from here all of the tract block group data that just is from LA County, right? And that's an attribute-based selection, and that gets to some of the questions we'll get to later. But if I select by attributes, I'm just selecting my attributes from this table, right? And by the way, this is the old Excel file, so I really don't want that, do I? It's actually gone, so I better open this. And I'll say I want to select by attributes. And I want all the ones where county equals. And it's a good idea to, instead of typing in here, just to use these tools to create the syntax. And so now I've selected only those in LA County. And I can export those. And export 5 is a good name, okay? And now I've got that. I really don't need this anymore, so I'm gonna dump it. We good? Okay. This is block group data. If I sort by tract number, I can see that there are multiple records per tract. And these are only tracts. So I have to summarize this data to get to a table that I can actually join. If I tried to join this way, I'd be joining many to one, right? And what I really want is a one-to-one difference. So I'm gonna.
So in that case, you could do a relate, is that right?
You could do a relate, but a relate isn't going to get me where I wanna go. And I'm not having you guys do any relates in this class at all. I want you to know what they are. But actually relates are something a little bit different. I'll cover that in just a second. It's actually a join to go many to one or one to one. And relates are many to one this way. But I'll show you that. So I do want to make a join, and I'm going to first summarize by tract so that the table that I join has one record per tract, right? And so that's a summarize. And you guys know already that you wanted to summarize and get lots of different population groups, right? I'm only going to do one just to make it go a little faster. Does that make sense? So NMAL is the total population, not the population by age, right? So I'll just say I want the sum of that. What that means is when I summarize by tract, it's going to sum up all of the NMAL numbers for each tract and give me that in the final table. Make sense? All right. Am I going too slow, or is this all right? All right. And I've got it there. I'm not bothering to change the names or anything. I'm being pretty lazy. Okay. So now I've got this summary table, and this is the table that I'm going to join to the tracts. Now, some of the ways in which people were getting confused is they didn't know what to join to what. So a join is always taking a shapefile, which has geography, and just a flat data table, which has no geography, and joining that flat data table to the geography to make the attribute table for that shapefile wider, right? That's what a join is. So you always start with the shapefile, and you say, I want to make a join, and I want to join it to this one, and the field that I want to use is GeoID 10, and I don't have that here, right? I only have tract number, so I'm going to have to use here the tract number. Yes?
Can you join a shapefile to a different shapefile?
Join a shapefile to another shapefile. You can join the attribute table of a shapefile to another shapefile. Okay, and then you have these options. I'm just going to say keep everything. All right, and then now when I open my census tract attribute table, I have that information, right? And I usually, sort of scroll down to make sure that there's actually numbers there, which there are. Certainly some census tracts have no people, right? Like almost Universal Studios. Okay, so now I'm pretty good. And I know I'm gonna be area weighting in order to estimate population, right? So, and if I'm area weighting, one thing I'm gonna need is the area of all of my census tracts. And so that would be an example of where I'm adding a new field. I call it tract area. And I'm going to make sure it's a floating point number because we were doing it in square miles, weren't we? You have two calculators. One calculates numbers or text, and the other one calculates geometric relationships. And so area is the one I want, and I want it in square miles. And I've got those. Okay? Now, I've joined this file. I've added a new layer. And if I want to make this joined file permanent, because it really isn't, I can go ahead and I can export this as a new shapefile, okay? I'm showing you all these steps because these are all individual skills, and this lab is what I dreamed up to sort of put all of these individual skills in context. In reality, when you're doing a project, you would decide which one of these to use when appropriate, okay? I don't really have to do this, but I will. And I'll just not change the name because I'm being lazy again. Okay, so now I've got this new layer, which is my census tracts, and it's got all the information I need to go on, right? Make sense? And here's tract area. All right. So I don't want all of the census tracts in LA County. Remember, I just wanted those ones in Los Angeles County. And so here's my LA city boundary, and that covers part of it. So to get only the tracts in the city of Los Angeles, that would be a select by location, right? And I'm selecting from here, and I want them to relate to the LA city boundary. I'm asking which of these census tracts intersect the LA city boundary. And those are the ones that are selected, and I'll turn off the city of LA, and now I can see which ones there are, right? Some of these census tracts are not all in LA County. We could select it in other ways, but that was the way I chose to do it, okay? So now I've got only the census tracts that are in LA County, right? And by the way, if you wanted to do another selection now, you could do another selection by using some of these operators, right? You could remove from here, you could do whatever you like, okay? So these are only the ones that are in LA County. I'm just gonna sort of leave them selected there for now. And actually, no, I have to do an intersect, don't I? Right? So I better save this as a separate shapefile just to keep things straight. And so I'm going to stop being lazy. And I'll call these LA County tracts. All right.
Those are all in the city, right?
All in the city.
Okay.
Yeah. So now, the problem that we're dealing with is that we're only dealing with the area adjacent to freeways, right? And are there questions about what a buffer is? I think there may have been. What was that question of what a buffer is? Can you guys see why I try to do my reviews this way? I'd like a demo of creating buffers. Okay, so we're just gonna do that and stop fiddling around. So I need the freeways, which are here. And I wanna buffer those freeways, and that is a geoprocessing step. We're gonna cover all of these others after the midterm, but right now we're just gonna do a buffer. And a buffer is this equidistant area surrounding the features that we want to buffer, okay? And I guess we're gonna call that buffer 1, and I chose 1,200 feet, didn't I? And I want to dissolve all of the internal boundaries, so I just have those things that look like intestines, right? And here they are, and they just look great. Yes?
I missed the part about 1,200 feet. What was that?
I just picked 1,200 feet just for this demonstration.
What is that? What do you mean?
That's the distance from the freeways that the buffer would measure. Okay?
And that is on both sides of the freeway, correct?
Right, because if I zoom in here, you can see here's the freeway and it's 1,200 feet on either side. Make sense? It's also 1,200 feet from the end out to here. Okay. So now I've got my buffer, and now I want to intersect. And there were some questions about what an intersect was, so I've given you a little cartoon here, 2 cartoons actually, to show you. So what we're doing with an intersect is we're creating a new data layer. And we're doing that by overlaying 2 layers that georeference properly, but don't cover the same area. And I'm looking at the intersection between those 2, right? So if I have one data layer, which is this blue one, and another data, which is this circle, if I intersect, I only get the area they have in common, right? And here's another example there. Yes?
What's the difference between creating a new layer and just adding a shapefile?
Well, here, these are 2 layers that I have access to. You know, my buffers and my tracks, right? When I do the intersect, I'm gonna get a new layer, which is what those 2 layers have in common. That's different from just adding another layer that you already have to your project.
So I think when you exported to a shapefile in a previous step, there was also an option to just like create it as a layer. So why did you actually?
Show me that, because I'm not remembering. So I took something and I exported it.
Yeah, right below the data thing. There's
Oh,
this-
I know what you're talking about. Okay. It gives you these choices. Is that what you mean?
No. So when you right click on the freeways buffer one,
Right click here.
right underneath where it says data, there's an option to save as a layer file.
Oh, okay. We're not going to work with layer files, and I'll tell you what a layer file is. Say you were working in a big GIS group, and everybody's working on a different project. Say you work for the city of Los Angeles. That's where some of my students work. And the city of Los Angeles has a data library. And one of the layers in that data library is the freeways. They want to make sure everyone uses the same freeways, right, for consistency. Well, not everybody can be editing that at the same time, or not everyone can be doing stuff with that at the same time, or it would be terribly confusing. It would probably break the files. So a layer file simply says, when I'm in this project, I'm going to go to that central library, and I'm going to get a copy of that. And I'm just going to work with that copy, but I'm not going to change the original one, right? So all the changes that I make in my project, I'll see and are valid, but it doesn't change the original one. And then later, decisions can be made about whether the changes I made should be made to the official one or not. That make sense?
Okay.
So it's not something we'll work with. It adds complexity that we don't need.
All right,
Okay?
thanks.
All right. If you've got a job working with GIS, and you may, they cover all of those protocols. Okay? All right, so now we have our buffer, and we need to intersect. Everybody with the intersect on why we're doing it? Okay? So that was B here. And I'm intersecting my buffers and my census tracts, which we're now calling export 6, is that right? Or am I off?
It's LA.
Oh, this one, yeah,
Yeah.
right, okay. And that's why you have to really name things, right? And that will be good. So it'll be called intersect. It'll take a minute. It always gives you a little friendly indication here, but it doesn't always, so that's unfortunate. And so now my intersect looks like this. Okay? Get rid of my buffers. All right. And there's my intersect. Each of these intersect polygons in GIS parlance are called slivers. Okay? And if I sort by census tract, you can see that there are in some cases more than one sliver per tract. Can I find one of those? I think you can imagine how that could be true, right? Here's one. No, that's not quite one. Anyway, we know what census tract it's in, right? So each of these has a population which is a portion of the tract that it came from. Let me just zoom in here and illustrate that. So here's the original tract, right? And we've just got this little piece of it now. And by my eye, that piece looks about half the size of the original tract, right? So if the population in this tract is evenly distributed, that's an assumption. We know it's not quite true, but it's the best we can do at this point. Then the population here should be about half what the population is of the tract. So the next step is to take these areas, this area, and divide it by the total area of the tract in order to get that ratio to multiply by the total population of the tract and estimate what that population might be, okay? We can actually do a little better with some other techniques, and maybe we'll do those a little later, okay? So, in order to do that, we do have the area of the tract, but we don't have the area of these new polygons, these slivers. So what do we need? A new field. And I'm calling that sliver area. That should also be a, floating point number. And we'll go ahead and we'll calculate that. Better be the same units or you're in big trouble, okay? And now we can go ahead and calculate what portion of the total population is inside of all of our slivers, and that would be a new field. I'll call that estpop. And I have to say that that should probably be an integer because having fractions of people doesn't make sense. And we can go ahead and we can calculate that. So that's going to be the sliver area divided by the tract area. And we'll have to put that in parens. And that's times this, right? And it calculates that for all of the fields. If I'd only selected some of the fields, it would only calculate it for the ones I selected, right? And then here's the number of people in each of those places, each of those slivers. And if you wanted to get the total, you could do it that way. Okay? So that's the general steps that lab required. Okay? And what I meant to show you was that it's a big improvement in what we did previously, where we said, let's just select all the tracts near freeways and use that as our estimate of who's exposed. That was not a very good estimate, right? This is better. Imperfect, but better. Okay? Does that help? Okay, I'm thinking that's going to clear up some of the other questions that we had too. Any questions about this? Shilpa?
Do you mind quickly just going through how you would then summarize this table to answer those questions, like how many population of 5, or do you need to summarize this table again to answer the questions?
You don't have to summarize the table.
You can
What I
just-
did was I went to that field and I said, just give me the statistics. And that in a way is summarizing that,
Okay.
that field, right? And it just gives you the basic numbers.
Okay.
This is kind of cute because it's summarizing that field, right? But I can just go to one of these other fields and summarize it if I wanted to. Okay. Okay. Questions? So let's just go back to our list of questions. So what I'm hoping is that that covered these questions, right? If you identify your question and it wasn't totally explained, we good? Okay, I saw your hand. So somebody said, can we go over buffer and intersection? And we just did, right? But we can do it more if you want to. But remember, it's called an intersect. And an intersect is when you overlay two shapefiles and the overlay results in what they have in common, okay? There are other ways that you could overlay two shapefiles and get something else. Okay, there's a question about dissolving, okay? And if you're dissolving, what you're doing is you're using this method to take a layer, let's say it's polygon, polygons, that has lots and lots of polygons, and you want to make it into fewer according to some attribute, okay? So if we go back here, and we look at our, I think this was, yeah, this is all the, this is all the census tracts in Los Angeles County, right? And I'm gonna unselect everything. If I wanted to take this and just make it into the boundary of the county, all of these tracts have in common one attribute, which is what county they're in. Does that make sense? So if I were to dissolve by the county, which is, do I have a county number here? Gee, I don't think I do. This one had it, I know. Okay. So this one has the, doggone it, this doesn't have it either. Okay, let's do this instead. So here's the state of California, right? And you could dissolve out all of these county boundaries and just get the outline of California, right? You're taking a shapefile with many polygons and you're simplifying it into fewer based on an attribute that is in the attribute table. That would be the key, right? And this is the county. So if I were to dissolve this, get in there, guy, and I would dissolve it by the county number. That would give me a new shapefile. That shouldn't take that long to do. Oh, you know what? I dissolved it in the wrong way. Oh, they each have a different county, right? So we know that all of these are in the same state. Oh, this is a good way to sort of show this. These are all in the same state. Does that make sense? And instead of making this an integer, I'm going to make it a text item. That make sense? And I'm going to say all of them have the same state, which is California. Now, because this is text and not a number field, ArcMap isn't going to let me do this calculation. It's going to yell at me. See, it gives me, and it really doesn't give me an error that's very useful. But, so it just couldn't do it. So let's try to do it again. And what it wants is it wants this to be encased in quotes because that says it's text. That's all. That's part of the syntax that it uses, and now I've got it, right? Okay. And now I should be able to dissolve that. So these all have state in common, right? And that should give me what we want, which it does. Okay. So does that help on how to dissolve this? Are we good so far? All right. Show how you concentrate data to a specific location, like isolating everything in Los Angeles. I think I showed that with selecting by location, right? You could also do that with selecting by attribute, couldn't you? Depending on what you've got. Yes, so either one of those, you're taking a large set of features and you're selecting from those just the ones that are fitting the criteria you want.
I understand how to do the dissolve, but why would we want to do that? Like, when would that come in handy?
Sometimes it comes in handy. Okay?
Okay.
Here's an example. What if I had census block groups and I wanted to, here, let me give you an example. Here's one that's more specific to this project we're doing. Do you remember the name of my final intersect? There it is. Okay, so this is my final intersect. Let me turn this off so I can stop that. Remember I was telling you that some of these slivers belong to the same census tract, right? And then I couldn't find one, which was kind of embarrassing, but I know it's to be true. So there's 648 slivers. If I dissolve this, I should be able to simplify it so that each of those areas all belong to one tract. Does that make sense? So it will be this that I'm dissolving. And I'm dissolving it by tract, right? And it had some long, horrible name, I think. Okay, so this had 648. And here's my dissolve. Well, okay, I lied. They're not, they're all different tracts, aren't they? Okay? Yes?
Does that have anything to do with the fact that you clicked dissolve all when you were making it, or is that just totally unrelated? Well, no, not this time, but like when you were doing the intersect initially in the buffer initially, you did a dissolve all as one of the things that you.
No. Let's say that this is the road network. Okay?
Yeah.
If I was to dissolve none, right? It would say, okay, this is a road and I'm making a hot dog around it. And this is a road segment, right? So I'm making a hot dog around it. And then this is another road segment.
Okay.
So I'm making a hot dog around it. So see? And by dissolving, you're getting rid of these things. Okay? Had we not dissolved, we would have just had a lot more polygons. It probably wouldn't have made a difference, but it would have just been more confusing. It might have overcounted too. Okay? Yes?
Would you think it would have overcounted, because if there were overlap, it would have counted?
I was just thinking
twice?
it would probably overcount, so. What am I looking for in this midterm exam? Am I looking for you to do the most complicated and involved and nuanced analysis possible? I'm looking to see whether you understand these basic skills and how they might apply, right? So this would be a terrible test question because there's all sorts of ways in which you could run into trouble, right? Okay. But this is a nice question to prepare with, right? So you can perform better on the exam. Good? Okay. Are these questions answered about doing different types of selections to get a subset of your features? Can you go over how to combine data into one topic? So it sounds here like we're calculating new fields, right? If we had Asian and Pacific Islander and Indigenous all into one category, right? So how might we do that? We need the data with race in it, which is, oh yeah, would you do that? That would be great. Thanks, Keegan. I think this one had the data, didn't it? So now we're in Florida. Okay, so these are the Florida counties, and these are the Florida counties with the number of people of different ages, right? So let's say we wanted all the pre-college age children, right? So that would be this and this, but not that, right? You're in college by the time you're 18. So the way I would do that is I would just add a field, and it better be an integer, right? And I'll call it collage or college age. And I could recalculate that as under 5 plus there. Does that make sense? And that would be the number. Now what if I wanted what percentage of the population of each county this college age or under college age group is? Well, I would have to go with another field. And that better be a floating point number. And I could calculate that as my college age divided by is total population here. Yeah, that one. Now we got it. Make sense? Questions, guys?
With short integer and long integer, how many digits like would short integer be?
Short integers are 2 or 3, 1 to 3 digits.
Okay.
The problem with short integers is this: if you know that's it, great. If you're not sure and you get a 4 or a 5 digit number, it will simply truncate. It won't round them, it will just truncate them. The reason that there is that comes from days before you were born, right? When database applications first were developed, data storage was very expensive. And so they were looking for ways to make data tables short in order to make them have less storage and calculate more quickly. It's really not an issue today, but everything is written so that you can get to that legacy information. It's just the way it is.
Can you just, when you're doing the percent of this age, it reminded me of the percent of total function when we were making thematic maps. Can you just refresh what
Sure.
that means?
So let's say I wanted to make a map of this one. And how do I do a symbol? I have to go to the symbology, right? And let's say I'm looking at quantities here, and the quantity will be just one of these age categories here, okay? So this is only showing the number of kids of this age group in each county, all right? It's not normalized. And I have different ways in which I can normalize it. Now, ArcMap allows me to normalize by any of these things, and probably normalizing by some of these things probably wouldn't make any sense at all, right? But I think the question you're asking is if we normalize it by percent of total.
Yeah.
Okay. If I normalize it by percent of total, it's saying for each county, take the number of people of that age group and compare it to the number of people of that age group in all of the counties. So of all of the 18 to 21-year-old people in Florida, what percent of them live in Alachua County and what percent of them live in Burke County? That make sense?
But if you did by Pop 2000, be percentage of that of that county.
It would be
tract.
it would be the percentage of that age group compared to the total population of all ages.
Okay, I see. Yes.
Make sense?
So the percent of total is total of that subfield, or total of?
Total of that field.
Okay.
And this is just another field.
So essentially doing the same thing, it's just percent of total refers back to itself. Okay, that.
Okay? And you have these choices. It doesn't tell you which one to use. One of the questions about normalization is, how do I know I should normalize, and how do I know I'm doing it the right way? And I don't have an answer to that question, because it really depends on what you're trying to do. If I was trying to answer the question, where should we put another college in Florida? I might want to know, of all 18 to 21-year-olds, which county has the largest percentage of all Floridians, right? But if the question was, I'm trying to think of a question where college age compared to everyone else. Where should I focus a voter registration drive trying to capture 18 to 21-year-old voters? Then it might be more important to compare them to the total population. Okay? Just depends on what you're trying to do. That answer your question?
You
Might not be the
also-
best analogy, but.
You did, but then I'm still thinking about it. I'm still kind of confused because Can you just say it one more time?
Say the
Like,
difference between this.
This and then what
And
we
this?
yeah.
Okay. If I normalize by the total population, I'm saying in each county, what's the percentage of college-age kids compared to the population of Florida overall? If I'm saying percent of total, it's what percent of college-age kids compared to all college-age kids only in Florida. You know what, let's do this. Let's do it by percent of total, okay? I hope I'm gonna get a map that's interesting. Okay, it looks like down here, we have high values, right? So it looks like it looks like college-age kids are overrepresented here as compared to the rest of the state. Make sense? So let's keep that in mind. These three counties, by the way, this is the Gold Coast, right? Where people go during spring break.
Yeah.
All right, but now let's do it by population. Well, that's a very different looking map, isn't it, right? Okay, so college-age kids here are overrepresented as compared to all the college-age kids in Florida, right? But it looks like college-age kids are actually a higher proportion of the total population of the state up in these counties.
So in the ones that were green on the last one, it could just be because the population is higher in those, right?
Here,
Out of all the people that are in college, the highest percentages
it depends on the total number of college-age
Okay.
kids, not the total number of all people of different ages. Okay? You know, ArcGIS is just giving you these simple arithmetic tools to use. The trick for you is to apply them to the specific question you're trying to ask. Good? All right. So let's see where we are now. Can we go over joins? Okay, we're not going to relate tables, okay? But I do want to summarize here. So these are a whole bunch of questions about joining and joins and relates, right? So if I've typed something back to you, I just put it in all capitals. I'm not trying to shout at you. But I wanted to explain the difference between joins and relates, okay? So joins and relates, you're attaching a table with no spatial information to a shapefile. You're attaching that flat table to the attribute table of a shapefile. And in order to do that, you have to have a field in common in those two tables in order to do the join. And if you don't have that, you can't make the join. You can't connect the two, all right? That join is temporary, only applies in this project. You can break the join, you can remove it, right? Or if you want to, you can save that joined shapefile as a separate shapefile, which would make it permanent, okay? And that's, I think, what I've said here, okay? So now, I hope that's big enough. I've said here that joins are relationships that are one-to-one or one-to-many, okay? Here's an example of one-to-one, where you've got the same number of records in the flat file as you do in the attribute table of the shapefile, and that would be a join. Another way you can do a join is one-to-many. Each feature in the shapefile can be joined to many of them in the join file, okay? But if you're doing a relate, you're doing many to one instead of one to many, okay?
How's it different from a summarize?
Excuse me?
Many to one, how is that different from a relate?
A
different
relate,
from summarize?
this is the shapefile side, and this is the join file.
I know, but I mean, like summarizing data, how's it different from a relating many to one? Like when we summarize all the tracks, slivers, or, you know, when there were multiple different.
Okay, I'll give you an example of where you might want to do a relate. let's say, I've got to see these a little better because I'm kind of blind. These look like addresses, right? So let's say that each one of these is the address of a hospital. And these are individual records about patients, right? You have many patients that are in each hospital, okay? So you're saying you could summarize this table in order to get that information? I'm not sure.
Maybe.
If there was a field here that said what hospital were you in, you could probably summarize by it. And what you'd get is a little standalone table which gave you the number of people in each hospital. But what this does is it allows you to select a hospital and indicate all of the people that are in it, right?
So it's like you are making a new column, but it's not really there, it's just simply between the two.
You can think of it that way. It's where you have a shapefile with its attribute table, and there's other information that you want that is in the context of those geographic features, and you don't have it. Well, joins and relates are one way to get there. But in order to have a join or relate, you have to have a common field, and if you don't, you can't do it that way. Okay? Here's another way to think of it. When you're summarizing, you're asking a question to get an answer. You're querying, right? With joins and relates, you're really establishing relationships between two different files that don't yet exist. All right. You know, on an exam, it would be fair to me to have you do a join, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
But it would be fair to me to say, look in the shapefile. There's a field called blah blah, right? And that field is describing something or other. And if you look in the join table, you'll see another field that describes that same thing, right?
You would be that specific? Like you wouldn't
Well, you know, I haven't
necessarily.
written the question yet, but I can't fairly ask you to do a join unless there's a common field.
I know, but you wouldn't leave us to determine what that common field is.
I don't know. I'm not going to promise that. But I think anytime you're considering a join, first thing you do is say, what's the common field? Let me make sure.